The LDS Church made a social media post featuring a husband's support for his wife's career as a pediatric neurologist.
It was a fairly banal post about a man recognizing the work he said his wife was clearly made for.
Some people commented that the post conflicted with the church's teachings about motherhood and women's roles.
Because that tracks with decades of church leaders teaching that mothers belonged at home.
For as long as we can remember, and well before that, being a stay-at-home mother was presented as God's design for women and families.
So when the church celebrates a working mother now, the question is, did the teaching change, or are we all just supposed to pretend it was never taught? Hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Postmortems, Mormon Monday. I'm your host, Jess.
And I'm Hannah. As Jess said, welcome to the second episode of Mormon Monday, where we take a look at what is relevant in Mormondom lately. Today, we are talking about what might sound like a typical Instagram post if it came from somewhere else, but this was an LDS Church Instagram post, which became a very revealing Mormon argument.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It really does. The post came from the church's official Instagram account. It featured a young husband talking about supporting his wife's career as a pediatric neurologist. According to Jana Reese, writing for the Salt Lake Tribune, the husband said, quote, "Supporting her doesn't shrink my purpose, it expands it," close quote.
Fairly normal sentence in many contexts.
In many contexts, a husband supports his wife, who is a doctor. He sees her work as meaningful and also imagines that one day they will be totally loaded. The church shares that as a positive social media story. And you can probably guess how a good part of Mormon social media then responded.
Oh, I sure can. Reese says some commenters acted as though the post had declared motherhood obsolete. One person asked how the wife was supposed to have children if she was busy being a doctor all day. Another accused the church's public relations department of, this is my favorite, estrogen poisoning.
Oh, so subtle.
Very priesthood holder in the comment section.
We know them. Every ward has at least a dozen.
At least. But then came the counter response from younger TBMs. Some people defended the posts by saying this was already consistent with church doctrine. One young woman argued that the church was not changing its tune. A young Latter-day Saint dad said people were reading the family proclamation through an outdated cultural lens.
That sounds like the part where the argument gets more interesting.
Exactly, because the question is no longer just, can a Mormon woman be a doctor? I mean, obviously, yes. The real question is whether the church has always taught that a married mother can build the demanding professional life without that being treated as spiritually suspicious.
And the answer to that is sitting in the archive.
It sure is. The family proclamation says fathers, and I'm going to quote here, are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. It says mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children. It also says fathers and mothers should help each other as equal partners, and that disability, death, or other circumstances may necessitate individual adaptation.
Individual adaptation.
Mhm.
That line is carrying more weight now than it did in the older teachings.
Yeah, it sure is. Younger members are using that phrase to account for families that don't fit the older breadwinner and homemaker model. It also makes room for husbands who do real caregiving instead of calling raising their own children babysitting.
I do so enjoy hearing men talk about babysitting their own children.
Their own kids.
Yeah. I'm going to ask my husband to babysit.
What?
Yet the broader reading, it's better for actual families.
It is. I mean, to be fair, the problem is that in lived reality and in practice, the church hasn't merely had a vague preference for mothers being in the home. They have tied it directly to divine design. It hasn't been taught as an individual's preference. It's been taught as the standard you are expected to follow, and women built actual lives around it.
Absolutely. Our mothers built their lives around it. So when older women hear younger members say the church has always supported this, that in no way matches reality.
It doesn't. Spencer W. Kimball was very clear about this. In church curriculum that quoted his counsel, he told wives to come home from the typewriter, the laundry, nursing, the factory, and the cafe. He said no career approached the importance of being a wife, homemaker, and mother.
Yeah, he's being pretty unequivocal there. And wow, look at the expectations that he has for women. He's like, don't come home from the boardroom. No, no, no. You are not a surgeon.
No,
No, you
no
are going,
captains of industry.
yeah, you are going to be a secretary, a maid, a nurse, a factory worker. We see the expectations.
We do, and Kimball wasn't the only one. Ezra Taft Benson was just as direct. In his 1981 General Conference talk that was titled The Honored Place of Woman, he said that before the world was created, quote, the pattern and role of women were prescribed, end quote. He said women were elected by God to be wives and mothers in Zion, and that the exaltation in the celestial kingdom was connected to faithfulness in that calling. So this was not framed as a flexible lifestyle preference.
No, indeed no. It was framed as eternal order. And that matters because when people made decisions under that teaching, they are not just hearing this is one possible option for your family. It might work for some households, but it might not work for yours. No, no, no. They were hearing this is what God designed women for.
And that changes the weight of all of it.
Completely. Jana Reese's central point in her article is that younger Latter-day Saints are right to defend women's careers, but they are wrong when they say the church has always taught this. The record doesn't support that. There were women who worked, though.
Of course, widows worked, single women worked, poor women worked, women whose families needed money worked. The church did sometimes tell girls and women to get training and prepare for employment, but the ideal still pointed them home. The official model was father as provider, mother as nurturer, with adaptation only allowed when life forced it.
Right. For the first 17 years of my life when I lived at home, I was reminded repeatedly, explicitly, that women working outside the home was the exception, only under extenuating circumstances. And if you had to work, God forbid, you should pick a traditionally female-gendered job where you can deploy all your innate nurturing all over other people's children.
Yeah.
Because what else would you want to do?
What else would you want to do? I mean, I have to say, like, even from a young age, this was this tenet, this facet of LDS theology and teaching was one of the first steps towards my own deconstruction. And the ideal shaped real choices for a lot more women than just me and just you, right? Reese gives a painful example from the late 1990s. She remembers a woman standing in sacrament meeting and saying she was leaving the career she had trained for because she had just had a baby and the prophets had taught that mothers needed to stay home.
And that is the part that makes this far more than an online argument.
Exactly. This is where prophetic counsel becomes someone's actual life. A woman chooses a college major with motherhood in mind. She turns down a job offer. She stays financially dependent way longer than she wanted to. Her husband's work becomes the family's economic center, while her work is treated as extra, temporary, or, as I mentioned earlier, spiritually suspect.
Then years later, the church posts a woman who's a pediatric neurologist, celebrates and highlights that, and younger members say the church has always supported this.
Right. And that's where the old pain comes roaring back. Older women are not misremembering. They were taught to treat motherhood as the center of a righteous woman's life, and they heard that message from people who claimed spiritual authority over them. Men's careers were framed as duty. Women's careers were framed as secondary, temporary, or justified only when family circumstances required it.
So has the language changed around it?
Well, yeah, it has softened, but it has not disappeared. In 2018, Henry B. Eyring gave a general conference talk called Women and Gospel Learning in the Home. He said women and mothers are primarily responsible for nurturing their children. He told women they have an innate and great capacity to sense the needs of others and to love. He also said that that capacity makes them more susceptible to the whisperings of the Spirit.
And that is a nicer version of taking the same retrograde gender ideas
Mm,
not founded in science and just repackaging them.
It is. And like I said, it's softer language. It sounds more reverent. It doesn't sound like come home from the typewriter, but it still treats nurturing as something especially lodged in women by divine design.
Absolutely. And that helps explain why the Instagram post blew up.
Yep. The men in the comments were ugly about it, go figure, but they were not inventing the gender system from thin air. They were defending what they understood the church to have taught. They learned that motherhood was a woman's primary role. They learned that fathers provide and mothers nurture. They learned that a mother's paid work needed special justification. They also learned that children especially needed their mothers at home.
So when the church now celebrates a husband supporting his wife's medical career, some members, go figure, experience that as a contradiction.
Right. They do, because it contradicts decades of emphasis. And the better answer is honesty. The church can say women's education and work matter. It can celebrate a pediatric neurologist. It can praise a husband who supports her career. It can give women more visible public roles. It can allow younger members to interpret individual adaptation broadly.
It also has to admit that older members did not imagine the old teaching. Okay, Jess and I, we know
Mhm.
these teachings were real. Spencer W. Kimball, he really did tell wives to come home from paid work. Ezra Taft Benson really did teach a woman that their role was divinely prescribed as wives and mothers. The Family Proclamation really does assign fathers and mothers different primary responsibilities. And later materials really do sound more flexible. That sequence is the story.
It is. That's where the culture versus doctrine move gets pretty messy.
Yeah, it gets very messy because once a teaching becomes embarrassing, members are then told that it's just culture or a product of the times, that everybody in those days thought that way. But when it was being taught, people were expected to treat it as counsel from prophets, seers, and revelators, as instruction from God's mouthpieces on earth. They were not told this is a temporary cultural preference that future members may safely disregard. Nope, they were told to obey.
And people did.
They did. Women obeyed, and men benefited from that obedience. Children were raised inside that arrangement, and they did not benefit from that obedience. Families organized time, money, education, ambition, housework, childcare, all of it around these teachings. And then the institution changed its public tone without taking responsibility for what the old tone cost.
Of course it did. They never take responsibility. But I want to say the issue is not whether mothers should work. Many mothers have always worked. The issue is who had the authority to define the righteous version of womanhood, and what happened to the women who believed them.
And now the church wants the public benefit of accomplished women.
It does. The current church benefits from faithful women who are educated, articulate, professionally accomplished, and visibly capable. It wants women who can speak at conference, lead organizations, run programs, earn degrees, manage complexity, and project competence. At the same time, the church inherited an internal record where leaders warned married mothers against building exactly those lives
Mm-hmm.
unless circumstances required it.
Absolutely. That tension doesn't go away because the Instagram grid looks better.
Nope. A single social media post cannot clean up the archive. In fact, 100 social media posts cannot. Reese is right to welcome the better message. It is better for the church to celebrate a husband who supports his wife's work as a physician. It is better for younger members to defend women's education and their employment. It is better for families to make decisions based on their actual needs instead of a rigid gender script from the 1970s and 1980s.
Mm. But better messaging does not erase
Mm.
the older record. The church's current post about a working mother clashes with the past church's teachings because past church teachings repeatedly discouraged married mothers from working outside the home unless circumstances required it. And Jenna Rice isn't imagining that contradiction, she's recording the record and
And
reading it.
she is. And that feels like the whole point.
It, it is. The honest answer isn't complicated. If the church wants to celebrate working mothers now, good. Celebrate them. Platform them. Stop treating women's ambition as a threat to the family. Stop acting like men become less masculine when they support their wives' careers. Stop building theology around unpaid female labor and then acting surprised when women remember it.
Yeah. Well, and stop telling older women they misunderstood what they heard.
Yes, thank you, institutional gaslighting, because they heard it clearly. We heard
We heard it.
prophets tell women to come home. We heard apostles teach that a woman's role was assigned before the world was created. We heard motherhood described as the highest, holiest version of womanhood. And we heard that paid work should be treated as an exception, only in necessity. And then it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah. But now we're watching the church celebrate what it once discouraged.
And that deserves more than a caption. That deserves an honest accounting.
Yeah. Thanks for spending your time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, or if it made you want to throw your phone across the room, we'd love to hear about it.
We would. The easiest way to help people find us is to leave a quick 3-second 5-star review rating wherever you listen, because that is way more helpful than you might think.
It is. And you can also find us on Instagram at Postmormon Postmortem, where we put a lot of helpful content as we talk through deconstruction, religious trauma, Mormon true crime, you name it. We've got something there. If you're going to look, you'll find it.
And if you know someone who's navigating their own faith transition or just loves a good deep dive into religious dysfunction, send them our way. Word of mouth is how we grow this little corner of the internet.
We will link Jana Reese's article and the church sources that we quoted in the show notes. If you want them, go look for them there.
We'll be back next Monday with another episode of Mormon Monday. Until then, Jess, before we go, I just want to say I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
I'm sorry for what I said when I was Mormon, too.
Bye, Eternal Family.